Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Herd Studios' Fun Facts Artist Series. Today we're going to be talking about somebody that you guys should all know. We're going to be talking about Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss was born as Theodore Seuss Geisel, March 2nd, 1904. Let's talk about his name, because we all know him as Dr. Seuss. A lot of people don't know that his name is Theodore Seuss Geisel. Dr. Seuss went to Dartmouth University and was a contributor and editor of their humor magazine, which was called the Jack-O-Lantern. However, he was later banned after being caught with alcohol during the Prohibition. And the Prohibition had to do with making alcohol illegal. It was something that happened in 1920, and his father had a very successful brewery company. That's where he made a lot of his money. And when this prohibition happened, it completely shut out his business, and his father ended up opening up a zoo during that time. And we'll get back to that in just a second. But because of this incident with the alcohol during the prohibition, he was banned from being part of the Jack-O-Lantern. And he started using different names instead of, Theodore Geisel. He started using the name T. Seuss and just Seuss. And that was kind of the beginning of where he started using the name Dr. Seuss. Those same colleagues at Dartmouth voted him least likely to succeed. And that's kind of funny because, he's one of the most well-known names in the industry of children's books, and even in artwork, he's got a little bit of a following there. Seuss used many pen names, so you may have seen some of his work with the pen name of L. Pasteur, D.G. Rossetti 25, Theo Lesig, which is one that I saw often. I was a big Dr. Seuss book collector. Lesig is spelled by taking his last name of Geisel and flipping it backward. His other pen names were Rosetta Stone and Theophrastus Seuss. The doctor part of it was used because his dad wanted him to practice medicine, so kind of as a kickback to his dad to sort of honor his dad, I guess, in a way, he added doctor to his name and became Dr. Seuss. But what's cool is that in 1956, Dartmouth went and granted him the honorary doctorate title, so then he became actually Dr. Seuss. Another interesting thing is that Seuss is not really supposed to be pronounced Seuss. That's how we pronounce it as readers. That's how we've always pronounced it, but it's actually pronounced more like Zeus. Because Seuss rhymed with Mother Goose and he was doing all these children things, he went ahead and adopted the pronunciation of Seuss and he became Dr. Seuss. So even he wanted to be called Dr. Seuss by this time. Dr. Seuss started working for a new magazine called Judge. Sometimes they were not able to pay their employees, so instead of giving them money, they paid them with free samples of soda, shaving cream, and nail clippers. Imagine that being your paycheck. His first children's book to write and publish successfully was And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. Loved that book as a kid. However, it was rejected 27 times before it was actually published. They say that when he would write a children's book, any kind of picture book, he would write and discard anywhere between 500 and 1,000 pages during the first draft of that picture book. He wrote for about 8 hours every day, and he dedicated his time to writing a lot of early readers' children's books. So you guys may be very familiar with some of his early readers like The Cat in the Hat and Green Eggs and Ham. And he wrote these books specifically because he read this article about how American children were struggling to read, and he wanted to help those kids. And there's a lot of science behind how he writes his books. It's not like he just wrote a bunch of random gibberish just to be funny or cool. It has to do with the meter of what he writes and the specific sounds that he focuses on. He was quite brilliant when he was writing these children's books. And in 1942, he started doing political posters. So he switched gears a little bit, and instead of doing the children's books, he started focusing on how he could use his art to benefit his country. So he started creating political posters encouraging America to enter the war. In World War II, he enlisted in the Army, and he was sent to Hollywood to help produce propaganda cartoons featuring the military misadventures of Private Snafu. During this time, he was awarded the Legion of Merit for his participation and his dedication to the war. However, he later did regret a lot of his depictions and his artworks that he created during this time, because a lot of his caricature styles of for instance, the Japanese Americans were offensive caricature styles. He regretted doing that because, it wasn't really politically correct. During that time, people would do that kind of stuff. It was sort of normal, but that doesn't make it right. And like I said, he wished he wouldn't have done that. Horton Hears a Who was inspired by Japan. He went to visit the country for a while, and he dedicated this book to Mitsugi Nakamura, who was the dean of the Doshisha University in Kyoto, who helped him while he was visiting in that country. He married his college sweetheart, Helen, and in 1927, I believe, and the two of them, believe it or not, were not able to have children, and Dr. Seuss was sad that he couldn't have children. He spent so much time helping children. He wanted his own children. And since he couldn't have his own children, there were times that he would dedicate his books to his imaginary kids. He would make up different names for his kids. For instance, Chrysanthemum Pearl. Whenever he has a dedication like that to his children, those are not real children of his. They are all imaginary kids because he was not able to have kids. Seuss sometimes had quite the sense of humor, probably oftentimes had quite the sense of humor after reading a lot of his children's books. But his phone number was apparently one digit away from the phone number of the local fish store. And when customers would call thinking they were calling the fish store, but they had called in by mistake, instead of redirecting them to the store, he would take their order and then he would send them a drawing of the fish they ordered instead of, sending them the actual fish. So yeah, he was kind of a prankster at times. One of my favorite tiny little facts about Seuss, because y'all all know me, Seuss is credited with inventing the word nerd. It first appeared in If I Ran the Zoo in 1950, also another great book. Seuss wrote a story called The Sneetches back in 1953, and a lot of classrooms today will use this as an anti-racist fable. I kind of use it that way also. I don't really dig as deep as some of these researchers do, but there are some researchers that have gone in and they have their own interpretation, and they say that the story is actually quite the opposite, because right now there's a push of preventing the idea of color blindness. Racism is not about avoiding race altogether and tolerating. Racism is about embracing race, and they suggest that this story doesn't embrace race. It promotes that idea of color blindness, that everybody's the same, so it doesn't matter if you have a star or not, we're all the same, and there's not really that level of embracing the history and the impact of different races. Another fun fact, Green Eggs and Ham was written based off of a bet. The Random House co-founder, he challenged the author to write a book using only 50 words, and Dr. Seuss delivered. He said, of course I can do that. If you haven't read Green Eggs and Ham, you need to. Yertle the Turtle was based off of Adolf Hitler. I think if you've ever read that story, that's definitely not a far leap. Now, if you've ever read the story The Lorax, it talks about all the deforestation that happens and what the consequences of that are. And in 1989, the logging industry wanted that to be removed from the school reading list. I guess it was having too much of an impact on their business, and they didn't want the children growing up thinking that the logging companies should stop doing what they're doing. So that was the first time that one of Dr. Seuss's books had faced any kind of push for censorship. All right, let's get back to the zoo thing. Dr. Seuss would make sculptures sometimes of fantasy animals, just like he would draw in his books. And he would use, from the zoo, he would use the pieces of the animals after they had died. So horns, antlers, bills, those kinds of things. He would use those in his sculptures from deceased zoo animals. Dr. Seuss published the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, and that was actually the last book of his that was published while he was alive. I do believe some collections and stories were kind of found afterwards and sort of finished up a little bit and published. Dr. Seuss was a heavy smoker, and he ended up dying of oral cancer in September of 1991 at the age of 87. Most of you guys that are in my classrooms, well, none of you guys in my classrooms were even alive at that time. I was the ripe old age of 10 when he passed away.